"What do you mean my account is overdrawn?" I stared at my phone in mock surprise, listening to Brandon's sister, or so I thought, sob on the other end about the rent money he'd promised her. "He said he'd wired it yesterday," she whined, voice cracking. "There's nothing here. Isla, I'm scared. He said he was going to fix everything." "He did what?" I kept my voice steady, letting her believe I was just learning of my husband's betrayal. Truth was, I'd seen this coming. I'm Isla Warner, forensic accountant, 38, born and raised in Milwaukee. And up until last Sunday, I was married to the biggest mistake of my life. His name was Brandon Warner. Or at least that's what he called himself when he moved here. That Sunday morning, I walked into the kitchen expecting nothing more than a slow breakfast and the crossword. Instead, I found a sticky note on the fridge. "Goodbye. Never loved you anyway." Real classy, Brandon. The bed was cold, his drawers empty. Even his toothbrush was gone. My gut didn't twist in pain. It settled into confirmation. I'd expected this for weeks, maybe months. Brandon thought he was pulling off the con of the century, vanishing with our money and a smug farewell. But what he didn't know was that every digital footprint he'd left in the past 3 months had already been documented, screenshotted, backed up, and forwarded straight to my attorney. Because Brandon hadn't married a naive woman. He'd married a forensic accountant with 15 years of experience tracking corporate fraud. When he started showing sudden interest in our retirement funds, asking about balances, tax shelters, high-yield accounts, I knew something was wrong. For years, he'd left all the finances to me. Now, he was asking about offshore transfers and who had authority on the accounts. That was the first red flag. Then came the late-night phone calls, vague, networking dinners, secretive browser histories, and half-cleared texts. Every time I entered a room, he minimized his laptop like a teenager hiding something. Brandon thought he was clever, thought he could erase his tracks. But money always leaves a trail. Always. By the time he left his little note and bolted, I'd already restructured our finances, opened new accounts in my name only, and filed a fraud flag with our banks. I'd moved our savings into protected trust holdings. Every shared account had been frozen under a mutual legal action. And the cherry on top? I'd installed transaction tracking software across all our devices. So that Monday, when the fraud alerts started pouring in, I wasn't panicking. I was smirking. One after another. Declined attempt at ATM withdrawal, $2,000. Suspicious login detected, Las Vegas. Credit limit reached on shared Amex. Transfer denied, flagged account. Each one like a symphony of failure to my ears. On my desk sat a thick black folder labeled "Just in Case." Inside were months of data, spreadsheets, photographs, email records, and screenshots of every shady transaction, my insurance policy, my arsenal. I sat back in my chair as Brandon's sister, the same woman I'd never actually met in person, begged for help. I barely heard her now. My mind had already moved 3 steps ahead. You might think I was devastated. 8 years of marriage, thrown away like a used napkin. And yes, once I might have been. But not anymore. Because the thing about being a forensic accountant, you learn to see beyond words, beyond charm, straight into numbers. And numbers never lie. Brandon, on the other hand, he left breadcrumbs everywhere. I first met him at a charity gala for a local literacy foundation. He wore a navy suit, polished shoes, and had that kind of easy confidence that didn't just walk into a room, it announced itself. He told me he was an investment advisor, specializing in high-return portfolios. He knew just enough lingo to sound credible, and I, apparently still a sucker for charm, believed him. We had drinks, laughed, swapped stories. He even claimed he'd grown up in Madison, said his parents had been teachers. Now I realize he never mentioned where he went to college, never once introduced me to an old friend, never let me speak to a single client. Hindsight's a hell of a thing. For the first 3 years, everything seemed perfect. We bought a 3-bedroom colonial near Lake Park, spent summers on Lake Winnebago, planned vacations to Italy and Argentina. He talked about kids. But even then, the cracks were there. He got defensive about his student loans, dodged questions about old employers. Whenever I asked about commingling finances for investments, he'd say, "You don't trust me? Why do you need to control everything?" I should have known. That Christmas, he insisted we use separate credit cards for gift shopping. To keep the surprises fun, he said. What he didn't know was I'd seen the receipts. Tiffany's, Cartier, high-end boutiques, none of which ever made it under our tree. And those weekend business trips? No hotel confirmations, no event registrations, just vague texts about client dinners and late flights. Some women might have confronted their husband right then and there. But I'm not most women. I got quiet, and I started building a case. The deeper I dug into Brandon's history, the more it unraveled like a cheap sweater. After he vanished, I spent hours in our home office, reviewing the evidence I had spent months quietly compiling. I wasn't just looking for closure, I was looking for a pattern, one I suspected stretched far beyond me. What I found made my stomach twist. Brandon wasn't just a liar, he was a professional. I started with the suspicious bank activity I'd flagged. Money moved in strange increments, always just under reporting thresholds, $9,800 here, $9,500 there. Classic structuring behavior, designed to avoid automated scrutiny. He'd set up accounts in fake names, sometimes with addresses just one digit off from ours. Then there were the out-of-state wire transfers. Not large enough to set off red flags on their own, but frequent and strategically placed. And the recipients? All women. All with first names I didn't recognize. One of them was Rachel Clark. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, until I cross-referenced an old case study I'd once read for work on identity laundering. Her name popped up in a fraud report from Phoenix, dated 3 years earlier. I froze. I reached out to Susan, my colleague at the firm and one of the few people who knew I was investigating my own husband. She ran a few discreet searches through our internal databases. 15 minutes later, she showed up at my desk pale as paper, holding her phone out like it might bite her. Isla, you need to see this. Brandon Warner, or at least the man I thought I married, was listed under a different alias in an SEC report from Arizona, Brandon Hall. Same smile in the photo, same cocky eyes. His name appeared again in Nevada, then again in Georgia. Always tied to missing funds, fraudulent investment firms, and vanished assets. Always paired with a new woman. New city, new identity. In each case, the playbook was nearly identical. He met professional women with strong financial backgrounds, married or moved in quickly, gained access to their money, spun stories about temporary setbacks, and business deals just about to close. Then, like clockwork, he vanished. He never went for the most vulnerable. That's what was so chilling. He picked confident, independent women no one would suspect could be conned. And now I realized I wasn't the first. I was just supposed to be the last. But Brandon had miscalculated one crucial detail. He didn't know that I, Isla Warner, specialized in following digital trails. The signs had been there for months, maybe longer. I remembered the time he came home and casually asked about how companies set up offshore shell accounts. Just curious, he'd said, thinking about some future investments. I'd laughed then. Now I knew better. That conversation wasn't idle curiosity. It was reconnaissance. And then, 3 weeks ago, the final piece snapped into place. I was working late, actually late, analyzing a batch of flagged offshore activity when Susan burst into my office, breathless. "I cross-referenced those Phoenix files like you asked," she said, eyes wide. "It's him. Same guy. Same behavior. Rachel Clark filed a report with local authorities 3 years ago, but they never followed up." "Why?" I asked. "Because the money trail went cold," she replied. "He used stolen identities, rented P.O. boxes. None of the funds could be traced directly back to her. But Isla," she handed me a USB drive, "I think we just found his weak spot." The files included screenshots of emails Brandon had sent under fake business aliases, contracts he forged, internal notes from a failed startup in Seattle tied to him under the name Bryce Kinney. The audacity was almost impressive. He'd slipped through law enforcement cracks over and over again because no one had been able to tie the aliases together. Until now. I spent the next several nights working with Susan and my lawyer compiling a timeline. It stretched back over a decade. 12 aliases, at least 9 women, all of them financially stable, successful, and ultimately left with nothing but wrecked credit and missing assets. Each time he moved to a new city, started fresh, and hunted again. And now I understood something even darker. I wasn't just another mark. Brandon hadn't married me because he loved me. He'd targeted me. My job, my credentials, my reputation, all of it had value. He knew I had access to secure corporate systems, that I worked with clients holding millions in sensitive financial data. And he was planning something much bigger than vanishing with our joint savings. He wanted to use me as a gateway. A few weeks before he left, he had asked me over dinner, "What kind of authentication does your firm use for wire approvals?" I'd raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "No reason," he said with a smile. "Just curious about what the big leagues do." I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now I saw it for what it was. Research. He wasn't content being a marriage scammer anymore. He was evolving, turning into a full-blown Ponzi operator, using my name, my access, my credibility. And he thought he could pull it off without me noticing. What he didn't realize was that I had already taken precautions, duplicating my passwords, separating access keys, alerting our security team quietly through internal channels. He couldn't use me. Not anymore. That was when I decided to contact Rachel Clark. I found a work number listed on an old real estate website, left a polite message. She called back within an hour. "You're the third woman to reach out," she said, her voice low and weary. "But I'm guessing you're the first who actually knows how to stop him." She was right. "I've got documentation," I told her. "Bank trails, false identities, a working relationship with the FBI's financial division. I'm building a case." Silence. Then she said, "Then it's time we burn the whole thing down." The morning after my call with Rachel Clark, I didn't go into the office. I took a walk along Lake Michigan instead, my hands buried in my coat pockets, replaying every moment of my marriage through a sharper, colder lens. For 8 years, I had lived beside a man who wore lies like tailored suits, polished, pressed, and convincing. But those suits were unraveling now. That afternoon, I met with Agent Clarissa Morrison from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We sat in a quiet corner booth at a diner off Brady Street, and I slid the just-in-case folder across the table. She didn't even open it right away. "I've heard about you, Ms. Warner," she said. "You cracked that pharmaceutical shell scheme in Minneapolis, right?" I nodded. "And 2 pension embezzlement cases last year." Agent Morrison finally opened the folder, leafing through color-coded spreadsheets and redacted bank records. Her eyes flicked quickly from page to page, then up to me. This is cleaner than half the evidence my agents bring in. That's what happens when you marry a forensic accountant, I replied flatly. She cracked a small smile. And what exactly do you want from us? Prosecution, witness protection for the other victims, and a sting. I want him caught red-handed. She leaned forward. Do you believe he'll try to contact you again? I don't believe it. I know it. Because Rachel told me exactly how it went with her. He disappears, she'd said, waits just long enough for panic to set in, and then sends a text. Something emotional, just enough to open the door. I made a mistake. I need your help. Can we talk? We both knew what came next. The sob story, the plea for a second chance, and then the ask. Access to one final account, one emergency fund, one small transfer. He did it to her, and to 2 other women Rachel had quietly stayed in touch with. And now, it was my turn. Sure enough, 3 days later, I got the message. Brandon, I'm sorry. Can we talk? Just one last time. There it was. Hook baited. Hook swallowed. I showed the message to Agent Morrison. It's time, she said. Let's set the trap. We arranged to meet Brandon at a local cafe on the east side. Neutral ground. Busy, but not too crowded. Surveillance ready. The FBI would be stationed in nearby vehicles and seated inconspicuously at surrounding tables. My job? To act just heartbroken enough to give him hope. The day of the meet, I dressed carefully. Soft sweater, no makeup, tired eyes. I needed to look just broken enough to be believable. Brandon was already there when I arrived, seated near the window with a cappuccino in front of him. His hair was longer, messier than I remembered. He wore a navy coat, the same one he'd used to charm donors at the local foundation gala the year we met. He stood up with a tentative smile. Isla. I didn't hug him, just nodded, sitting down opposite him. I'm sorry, he said. I know I should have handled things differently. Like not vanishing? I offered, keeping my tone light but clipped. He winced. I panicked. I made some bad investments. Things snowballed. I didn't want to drag you down with me. Ah, the noble excuse. Classic. He reached for my hand. I let him, just long enough to give the agents time to snap their photos from across the room. Then I gently pulled away. How much trouble are you in, Brandon? He looked down at his coffee. 200,000? Maybe a bit more. But I can fix it. I have a plan. Let me guess, I thought. You just need access to our emergency fund. I just need a little help to get back on my feet. A transfer. One time. I'll be gone after that, I promise. I played my part. The emergency fund, I said softly. The one you tried to clean out yesterday? He blinked. Slipped. That was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly, You mean like when you emptied Rachel's accounts in Phoenix? I said, louder now. Or when you fled Arizona under the name Brandon Hall? The blood drained from his face. I slid a small folder across the table. Inside, printouts of his fraudulent identities, stolen bank account logs, and screenshots of his emails posing as an investment advisor. You should have done your homework, I said. Stealing from a forensic accountant? Not your smartest move. That was the moment the agents approached. Brandon Warner. Or shall we say, Brandon Hall, Kinney, and Roberts, Agent Morrison said as she pulled out her badge. Brandon started to stand, but one of the agents gently pushed him back into his seat. You're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. I stood slowly, adjusting my coat. Oh, and Brandon, I said, you might want to call a lawyer. A good one? As he was led out of the cafe in handcuffs, I watched through the frosted window as he was loaded into the black SUV. He looked back just once, And for the first time, I saw the truth in his eyes. Not confidence, not calculation, panic. Back at home that evening, I received a text from Susan. Susan, we've cracked the offshore trail. His shell firm links to at least 4 major victims. And guess what? That country club he loved so much? He was using it to scout his next mark. Her name was Caroline Mitchell, hedge fund manager, sharp as glass. And also, one of my closest friends. Let me guess, I texted back. He's been grooming her. Susan, she gave us everything. He practically gift-wrapped the whole case while trying to seduce her. So Brandon had been laying the groundwork for his next escape before even vanishing from mine. But Caroline? She'd seen through him from day one. And together, we'd used their entire relationship as bait. Email transcripts, phone recordings, screenshots of encrypted chats. He handed us a blueprint of his entire operation without realizing it. And that wasn't all. Susan, remember his sister Kelly, the one who called you in a panic? I sat up straight. Susan, she's not his sister, she's his partner. FBI just flagged her at O'Hare trying to flee to Montreal. My smile faded as the next message hit. Susan, but she's not alone. We think he had muscle. Someone dangerous. Working clean up for him. Someone who's not afraid to intimidate witnesses. A chill settled in my bones. Brandon's game wasn't just smoke and mirrors, it was violence too, and the stakes had just gotten higher. 2 hours after Brandon was led away in cuffs, I stood in my kitchen staring at the security feed from my front porch. A black car I didn't recognize had parked across the street. It hadn't moved in over 40 minutes. My phone buzzed. It was Agent Morrison. "We just received something unusual," she said, without any preamble. "Check your email." I opened my inbox. There it was. A message from a burner account. Subject, clever girl. "You think this is over? Check your window." Attached were 6 photographs. Each one sent a jolt through my spine, not from fear, but fury. Me at the grocery store, me walking home from work, me on my balcony, sipping coffee. One was even through the slats of my living room blinds. Whoever took them had been watching me for weeks. I forwarded the email to Morrison instantly. "They've been surveilling you," she said. "This is Brandon's insurance plan. If the con fails, scare the witnesses into silence." "Any leads?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring. Belongs to a man named James Foster, Brandon's former cellmate in Phoenix. Multiple charges: assault, intimidation, financial extortion." Foster. Rachel had mentioned a threatening voicemail a few months back, but didn't connect the dots. "We think Foster's been his muscle," Morrison continued. "He does the dirty work, makes the threats, helps clean up when Brandon burns a mark too fast." I took a slow breath. "So where is he now?" "That's the thing," she said. "We can't locate him." It was almost 10 p.m. I texted Rachel to check in. Me. "All good there?" Rachel. We have a situation." My stomach turned. "Rachel, Kelly's here, in your house. She said she had a key from Brandon. She's trying to access your laptop." I dropped my phone. Kelly, the sister who was supposedly being picked up in Chicago. Either she escaped custody, or she was never picked up to begin with. I grabbed the phone again. Me. "Get out. Now. She's not alone. Foster's probably nearby." Rachel. "Too late. He's here." I could hear her breath quicken through the voice message that followed, whispered but steady. Then a crash. A second voice in the background, male, angry. "Where's the backup drive?" he demanded. I know she kept copies. I opened the surveillance app for the house. The camera in the living room had gone dark. They'd unplugged it. But not before it streamed 15 full seconds of footage straight to the FBI's secure server. Kelly rifling through drawers, Foster pacing like a shark behind her. And Rachel? She was playing them both. Calmly, I heard her voice through my second security mic. "Hey, Kelly, before you do anything stupid, maybe look at what's on the screen." I smiled. She was triggering the trap. Because every document, every incriminating file, every trace of Brandon's fraud wasn't stored locally. It was streaming in real time to FBI servers through a remote sync protocol. I heard sirens in the background. Morrison's voice buzzed in my ear. "They're on site. We've got surveillance vans outside, moving in now." 15 minutes later, Rachel texted me again. "Rachel, they're in custody, both of them. I'm okay." The relief hit me like a wave, swift and breath-stealing. I drove straight home, half expecting to see the place in flames. Instead, I arrived to flashing lights and Agent Morrison standing in my driveway. "You did good," she said. I shook my head. "Rachel did better." Morrison nodded. "She's sharp. No wonder Brandon picked her." We walked through the house, now littered with evidence tags. Kelly had tried logging into my password manager. Foster had scoured my office, probably looking for the drives Brandon warned him about. Neither of them realized the house was wired top to bottom. Microcams in the vents, floor sensors beneath the rugs, motion alerts on every door. "I had a feeling they'd try something like this," I said. Morrison gave me a long look. "You're not just building a case, Isla. You're building a blueprint." She wasn't wrong. Brandon had always counted on control. He chose confident women, yes, but only ones who loved him enough to trust him. By the time he started stealing, their doubt came too late. But this time, he picked the wrong one. The next morning, I was called into the Bureau's Milwaukee field office. Foster cracked during questioning. He admitted to installing spyware on Brandon's victims' computers. Confirmed that Kelly was not Brandon's sister. She was his co-conspirator, girlfriend, and financial mule. She created fake accounts, collected withdrawals, wired funds to shell corporations. They'd been running the same operation across multiple states for nearly a decade. But the most chilling part? They had already started targeting someone else. Caroline Mitchell. Brandon had taken her out for drinks 3 times before disappearing from my life. I texted her. "Me. You good?" "Caroline. Better than good. My assistant's been feeding the FBI everything. And guess what? We've got voice recordings too." By the end of the week, with Kelly and Foster in custody, the case file ballooned to over 1,200 pages. Brandon Roberts, his real name, had conned 23 women in 5 states. Each one more strategic than the last. But his greatest mistake? He married a forensic accountant. 2 months after Brandon's arrest, I sat in a federal courtroom in downtown Milwaukee, front row, center, watching him squirm in a suit that didn't quite fit. Gone was the charismatic smirk, the practiced posture of confidence. Now he looked smaller, older somehow, as if being caught had aged him overnight. Or maybe it was the weight of the 17 federal charges read aloud that morning. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, witness intimidation, securities fraud. The list went on like a slow, cruel symphony, each count another nail in the casket of the life he tried to build on lies. Rachel sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. On my other side was Agent Morrison, quiet but focused. She wasn't here for moral support. She was here because the FBI had just submitted the largest fraud case file in Wisconsin's history, and we were about to watch it detonate in real time. The judge, a stern woman with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared her throat. "Brandon Roberts," she said, "do you understand the charges brought against you?" He nodded, barely audible. "And how do you plead?" "Guilty," he muttered. There was no fight left in him. Not anymore. Once Kelly and Foster turned state's evidence in exchange for plea deals, the prosecution had everything. Audio, emails, digital footprints, wire transfers, hidden offshore accounts, victim testimony. Caroline's recordings alone outlined 3 separate fraud attempts, all made while Brandon was supposedly mourning the end of our marriage. But it wasn't just the evidence, it was the witnesses. We took the stand one by one: Rachel, Caroline, a woman named Dana from Las Vegas, another named Eleanor from Georgia. All of us painted the same picture: different cities, different timelines, but the same story of trust shattered and financial ruin narrowly escaped. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand and looked him in the eye. He didn't look back. "I'm not here because I was fooled," I told the courtroom. "I'm here because I followed the money," and it led straight to him. I laid out the case methodically, like I had 100 times before in boardrooms and investigations. Every transaction, every forged document, every breadcrumb he thought he'd buried. The silence in the room was thick by the time I stepped down, but the real moment, the one I'll never forget, came when the judge read the sentence. "Brandon Roberts," she said, "for multiple counts of fraud, theft, conspiracy, and intimidation, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 20. A stunned silence followed. Even Brandon's own attorney looked momentarily breathless. I looked at Brandon one final time. His face had crumpled, not from remorse, but from disbelief. For once, there was no exit plan, no back door, no sweetheart deal. Only bars. As they led him away, his eyes finally met mine, and in that moment I didn't see a monster. I saw a desperate man who had finally realized the game was over. Kelly and Foster didn't get off easy. Their plea deals were conditional. In exchange for testimony and access to Brandon's encrypted networks, they each received 8 to 12-year sentences, with Foster facing additional time for intimidation and unlawful surveillance. But their cooperation cracked the final pieces of the puzzle. Brandon's shell corporations were scattered across 3 countries: Canada, Belize, and Switzerland. His accounts were linked to false real estate ventures, fake investment funds, and a trail of stolen identities that would take years to untangle. Morrison's team was already working with Interpol. Every asset they recovered, every cent they traced, went into a fund for victims. Some had lost homes, others their retirement. One woman, Dana, had been on the verge of bankruptcy. But now we could rebuild. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Milwaukee field office. Behind me was a slide titled "The Roberts Model: Anatomy of a Financial Predator." This wasn't a courtroom. This was education. For the next 2 hours, I walked agents through the entire case, not just the data, but the psychology. The subtle red flags, the grooming patterns, how Brandon isolated his targets and gained their trust before extraction. "He never used violence," I said. "He used affection, familiarity, guilt. He didn't steal from strangers. He stole from the women who loved him." That was the true horror of it, but also the flaw in his plan, because when women come together, when we stop protecting the men who betray us, we become impossible to silence. Rachel had joined as a consultant for the Bureau's new initiative, WAVE, Women Against Victim Exploitation. Caroline was offering legal insight to victims of financial coercion. Dana had started rebuilding her business with seed money from the restitution fund. And me? I'd been offered a formal consulting role with the FBI. Morrison had asked, "What do you say, Isla? Ready to catch the next Brandon before he gets started?" I didn't hesitate. A month later, I changed my name back to Warner, not because I was hiding, but because I was reclaiming it. My new apartment overlooked the lake, quiet, peaceful, secure. I still kept the folder on my desk, the one labeled "just in case." But now it was filled with case studies, not warnings, lessons, patterns, tools. One afternoon, I received a message from Susan. Susan, we found another victim in Vancouver. She lost everything, but we've recovered 2 of the accounts he used. She might get it all back. I stared at the screen, then typed back, me. Let's make sure she knows she's not alone. And that was the real win, wasn't it? Brandon thought he could break us, one woman at a time. Instead, he gave us a reason to come together. 6 months after Brandon Roberts was sentenced, I stood before a different crowd, not a jury, not agents, but a room full of women, entrepreneurs, analysts, accountants, lawyers, survivors. The conference banner behind me read, "Wave, Women Against Victim Exploitation." The tagline, "We don't just recover, we reclaim." It was surreal. I adjusted the mic and scanned the room, remembering how it all started, with a note on a fridge and a sinking feeling I couldn't shake. But this wasn't about him anymore. This isn't a story of heartbreak, I told them. It's a story of numbers, of patterns, of women who refused to be erased by shame. They listened, not with pity, but with fire. After the talk, dozens approached me. Some shared their own stories. Others wanted to learn how to recognize the red flags. One woman, an attorney from Minnesota, said her sister had almost married a man who fit Brandon's exact profile. "We thought she was crazy when she got suspicious," she said. "Now we know she was right to ask questions." That's why we were there, not to relive the trauma, but to weaponize it. The FBI had formally brought me on as a forensic fraud consultant, part-time at first, then permanent. I helped build a new protocol for recognizing emerging romance finance frauds. The model was based on the Brandon Roberts case, but designed to catch dozens like him. We uncovered 3 more rings within 8 weeks. One was operating in Florida, targeting retirees through investment clubs. Another was in Seattle, preying on tech workers with fake VC pitches and emotionally manipulative dating tactics. But the most disturbing was international. A ring out of Toronto using dating apps to gather sensitive employment data from women in cybersecurity and finance. They weren't just stealing money, they were trying to steal access. That was Brandon's final play, too. Before his arrest, he had been in the process of setting up a new shell fund, Warner Capital Management, forged entirely under my name and credentials. He had printed brochures, built a website, was already scheduling meetings with investors. "He was going to use your career," Agent Morrison said bluntly, "to build his biggest scam yet." And that, more than the personal betrayal, lit the fire in me that never went out. I moved into a new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. Open floor plan, soft light, no shadows in the corners. The furniture was minimal, but the files were endless. Every folder that passed across my desk carried echoes of women like me, women who thought they were in love, women who were told they were paranoid, women who lent money and never saw it again. But we were changing that. Rachel Clark had joined the Wave Board, coordinating victim outreach and advising on language for protective legislation. Caroline Mitchell had spearheaded a legal advocacy program for financial abuse survivors. Dana, the woman from Vegas, was rebuilding her business and giving talks on how emotional exploitation hides inside financial relationships. Together, we were building a new kind of justice, one that didn't wait for courtroom victories, one that educated, prevented, empowered. One rainy Friday in October, Susan called me from the bureau. "We cracked his final encryption," she said. My heart stopped. "And? There's a ledger. Offshore. 14 accounts. We're talking about millions." She emailed it to me. As I scrolled through, I felt a tightness in my chest I hadn't expected. These weren't just numbers. They were names, women, places, dates. He hadn't just betrayed us. He'd logged it. Like trophies. Like evidence he never thought anyone would find. "Can we seize it?" I asked. "We already have," she said, "and the restitution fund just tripled." I exhaled slowly. Good. Let's make sure every last dollar goes to the women he hurt. Brandon wanted to control the narrative. Instead, we were writing the ending. A month later, I gave my first guest lecture at a university. The same one Brandon had falsely claimed he'd attended. The irony wasn't lost on me. I told a room full of business students. Modern con artists don't walk into banks with guns anymore. They walk into your life with smiles. They offer partnership. They say all the right things. And when they strike, it's not just your money they steal. It's your sense of safety, of certainty. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. Money leaves a trail. So do lies. They clapped, but it wasn't applause I needed. It was awareness. If even one person in that room remembered to ask the hard questions, to follow the paper trail, to trust the doubt in their gut, it would be worth it. Sometimes I still think about that Sunday morning. The note, the fridge, the silence. Brandon thought he broke me in 5 words. Goodbye. Never loved you anyway. But the truth? Those words set me free. He gave me the greatest gift a con man could give. A reason to rise. A mission. A fire that didn't fade with courtroom closure, because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure women like me, women smarter, braver, kinder than he ever deserved, would never fall victim to men like him again. Now, I sit on the Wave Advisory Board. I still consult with the FBI. And every time a woman contacts us to say she got out just in time, I remember. He didn't ruin me. He revealed me. And in doing so, he helped me become something more than just a survivor. He helped me become a force.